بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Inshallah, tonight in our lesson on the history of the Holy Land, we want to talk about an IDF military protocol that was widely used during the Gaza war that started in 2023. And this protocol of the IDF, the Israeli military, it was established in the 1980s. And supposedly it was officially discontinued after that due to a lot of criticism. But the reality is that it was never discontinued. And it continued to be a part of Israeli military operations, and it continues to be a part of Israeli military protocol to this day. And it was used extensively in the Gaza war that started on October 7th of 2023. It was used extensively in this war. And this protocol, this Israeli IDF military protocol that we are referring to, is called the Hannibal Directive. It is called the Hannibal Directive. So basically, what the Hannibal Directive is, it is an IDF protocol where when the Israeli military believes that a soldier or even an Israeli civilian, forget about soldiers, even an Israeli civilian, if a soldier or a civilian is taken captive, then the military forces are instructed to stop the abduction immediately by unleashing overwhelming firepower on escape routes, on vehicles, on positions. So what this means effectively is that if an Israeli soldier is captured, or even if an Israeli civilian is captured, and let's say the people who captured them are getting away in a vehicle, if the Israeli military is able to shoot down that vehicle and kill everyone in the vehicle, and that includes the captors and the captives, even their own people, their own soldiers or their own civilians, then they do it. The instruction is kill them all. Rather than have an Israeli captive alive, it's better for the Israeli captives to be dead. Rather than an Israeli captive, whether it's a soldier or whether it's a civilian, having them alive with the captor is worse than their death. So it's better to just kill them all, right? This is called the Hannibal Directive, and this is something that the Israeli military has used for decades, even though they officially discontinued it according to their own statements. The reality is that they never discontinued it, and they practiced it and implemented it a lot during the war that started in 2023. Right? And there are many examples of their usage of the Hannibal Directive during the Gaza war. So they say basically their logic behind this directive, this protocol, is that it's better to have a dead captive than a living bargaining chip. And one of the reasons why the Israeli government started this protocol is because they are aware of the cowardice of their own soldiers. They know that their own soldiers are cowards. And many times when a soldier is captured, a soldier may have valuable intelligence. And that intelligence could be very valuable to the one who captured them. So they try to extract that information from those soldiers whom they have taken captive. This is something that is known, that happens in wars, right? When a soldier is captured, many times, those who captured that soldier, they will put a lot of pressure. Sometimes they'll even torture the soldier to get information out of that soldier. And the information that they get, depending on the rank of the soldier, it could be very valuable information that could be used to inflict heavy damage upon the opposing forces. So the Israeli government knows that their soldiers are cowards, and it would be very easy to break them. It would be very easy to get them to speak, right? Alhamdulillah, in our history, the history of Islam, in the history of Muslim battles, many times Muslim captives have been taken by the kuffar, but they don't break under pressure, right? They will be tortured, they will be killed before they give out even a little information, alhamdulillah. And there are so many examples of this in Islamic history, alhamdulillah. Muslim soldiers are known for their bravery. They have been known for their bravery. But on the other hand, Israeli soldiers are known for the opposite. They are known to be cowards. This is something that is very well known, right? It's an open secret, right? They don't like to say it, but everybody knows it. So the Israeli government knows this as well, and this is one of the reasons why they formed this protocol, this Hannibal Directive, because they don't want any of their soldiers to be alive with their captors, because they fear that it would be very easy to extract valuable information from those captives. So they would rather kill their own soldiers than allow them to be alive in captivity, right? They know their own people, and this is one of the reasons why they started this protocol. So they officially say that we do not authorize intentionally killing captives, whether they are soldiers or whether they are civilians, right? But the reality is, and when you look at the facts of what they have done, and you see the reports of what they have done, then you see that this is something that, even though they claim they don't practice it, the reality is that they practice it and they continue to implement the Hannibal Directive. So basically, stop a captive from being taken alive at all costs, even if you have to kill the captive, right? Whether it's a soldier or whether it is a civilian. Shoot first, ask later, right? That is their protocol. That is the Hannibal Directive. So this is a directive, or this protocol was actually formed in the 1980s, and it was practiced for a number of decades. And the IDF, they claim that they canceled the Hannibal Directive in 2016, right? That they don't practice it anymore since 2016. But there are so many investigations that have been done and so many testimonies that have proven that even though in name it may not exist on paper anymore, but practically speaking, it is still implemented to this day, right? And you can see many examples of it happened during the Gaza war that started in 2023. So let's talk about some of those examples of the Hannibal Directive being implemented in the Gaza war that started in 2023. Of course, on October 7th, 2023, as we know, Hamas and other allied fighters with them, they were able to capture a number of Israeli hostages for leverage, right? And with regards to these hostages, the IDF implemented the Hannibal Directive on a number of occasions with these hostages. Many of these hostages were killed by the Israeli military. Many of those hostages that were taken by Hamas on October 7th were actually subsequently killed by the Israeli military. They were killed by the IDF. For example, one of the orders that was given on October 7th itself, right? So what happened? Hamas, they were able to cross over the border. They took hostages, and their plan was to take those hostages back into Gaza. Take those hostages in their vehicles back into Gaza. So one of the Israeli military orders that was given on that day is that no vehicle should return to Gaza. No vehicle should return to Gaza. So what does that really mean? That no vehicle can return to Gaza. Make sure that any vehicle that is trying to come back into Gaza, that vehicle is shot down. But who is in those vehicles? Is it only Hamas who's in those vehicles, or the Israeli hostages are in those vehicles as well? The Israeli hostages were in those vehicles, and they knew that. The Israeli military knew that, but still they gave this order that no vehicle should return to Gaza. Shoot down every vehicle that tries to enter Gaza, no matter who's in that vehicle. So they were knowingly giving an order to kill their own people, because they knew that those Israeli hostages were in those vehicles, right? So even though it wasn't called officially an implementation of the Hannibal Directive, what was it, practically speaking? It was an implementation of the Hannibal Directive. Kill the civilians before you allow them to be taken alive by their captors. That's exactly what it was, right? It was obvious, right? And this is actually what they did, right? They shot down a number of these vehicles. So it just shows that the IDF, they're willing to accept civilian death, even their own civilians, Israeli civilians, and their military objectives are given priority over the lives of their people, right? So these civilians who are killed, or these soldiers who are killed, whatever the case may be, these are considered acceptable losses to the Israeli military. Another example on October 7th of the Hannibal Directive being implemented. There was an order that was given on that day. One of the commanders gave an order, and he actually used the word Hannibal. He said, Hannibal at Erez, right? This military communication, it was recorded and it was leaked out. That one of the military commanders commanded Hannibal at Erez and dispatch a drone. So what is Erez? Erez is actually a border. It's a border crossing between Gaza and Israel, right? That border is called Erez. It's in the area of Beit Hanun, right? So that's a border crossing between Israel and Gaza. And of course, you know, the Israeli government has blockaded it, but that was where the border crossing was, at Erez. So one of the military commanders on October 7th gave an order, and this order was leaked out, and many news outlets reported it. The order was Hannibal at Erez. Like, basically that means implement the Hannibal Directive at the Erez border crossing, right? So, of course, those cars that had Israeli hostages, the plan was to come back into Gaza. And they were going to come through that border at Erez. So the order that was given was Hannibal at Erez. Like, destroy all of those cars that try to cross through that crossing. They have hostages in them, it doesn't matter. Hannibal at Erez. Destroy everyone and everything that is trying to cross the Erez border crossing. Right? So again, this is a clear implementation of the Hannibal Directive. These guys are willing to kill their own civilians, and a drone was dispatched for this, the Zeke drone, right? So basically the order was send a drone to the border and let that drone shoot down any cars that try to go into Gaza from that crossing, even though they knew that those cars would have Israeli civilians in them, right? So they would rather kill their own civilians than allow them to be taken alive into Gaza, right? And this was implemented. Another situation where the Hannibal Directive was implemented on October 7th was there was an IDF tank that shelled the house in a Jewish house that was known as Kibbutz Be'eri, right? And there were some hostages being held in that kibbutz, right? And the Israeli military dispatched an IDF tank to shell that house. So the IDF tank came and shot down that house, right? Killed everyone in the house, and there were a number of Israeli hostages being held inside that house. So a number of Israeli hostages were killed in that incident by an IDF tank. So they killed their own hostages because they did not want their hostages to be taken alive with their captors, right? Also, on October 7th, there was an Israeli helicopter that killed at least one hostage. One hostage was shot by gunfire that came from an Israeli helicopter, right? So basically, their orders are identify any movement as a threat. Any movement that you see, shoot. You don't have to know who it is. It could be a military soldier, it could be a Palestinian, it could be a member of Hamas, it could be an Israeli civilian, it could be a Palestinian civilian. It doesn't matter. You see any movement in those areas, then shoot. Shoot first and then figure it out later, right? So this is what they did, and there was at least one hostage that was killed by the fire that came from this Israeli helicopter. So these are incidents that took place on the day of October 7th itself. On that day itself. Now, after October 7th, when the fighting actually moved into Gaza, right? Because a number of those hostages were successfully taken into Gaza, right? So now, the Hannibal Directive still applied. In Gaza, the IDF wanted to identify where those hostages were being kept and to bomb those places into smithereens, killing the captors and killing the hostages as well. They had no plan to go in and rescue the hostages, nothing like that. There were no planned military operations, to find out where the hostages are being held and then, send a team to go in and extract those hostages, nothing like that. They would identify where the hostages were and then they would bomb those places, right, to kill their own civilians. And then this happened again and again in the aftermath of October 7th, right? So once the war shifted into Gaza, after October 7th, when the hostages were actually taken into Gaza, then of course, now these hostages were being held in the Gaza Strip, and it's very densely populated. Gaza is extremely densely populated, right? So, you know what happened in Gaza, right? That Israel bombed Gaza indiscriminately, right? They bombed schools, they bombed apartment buildings, they bombed hospitals, they bombed homes, right? And they didn't care if their own hostages were being kept in any of those places, right? So this was an implementation of the Hannibal Directive. In December of 2023, an incident happened. A very clear implementation of the Hannibal Directive happened in December of 2023, and this was widely reported, right? There were 3 Israeli hostages that had been held in the area of Gaza known as Shuja'iyya, the area of Shuja'iyya in Gaza. So these Israeli hostages were released, right? So they came out and they had no shirts on and they were each holding a white flag. So it's universally known that a white flag, it means surrender. So the reason why these Israeli hostages were holding a white flag was so that nobody could confuse them. Like if the Israeli military is coming in and you're holding a white flag, right? These Israeli hostages did not want the Israeli military to be confused and think that, okay, maybe these people are fighters, we don't know who they are, right? So they were holding white flags, which are the universal sign of surrender. That, we don't have any weapons, we're not coming out to fight, we're coming to turn ourselves in, right? That's what it means. So these Israeli civilian hostages, 3 of them, coming out holding a white flag. So what happened? The Israeli forces, what did they do? They saw them, the white flags. What did they do? These are their own people. These are not Palestinians. These are Israeli civilians. And what did the IDF do? They shot all 3 of them. They killed them, right? They killed their own civilians, right? So this is the open fire culture of the IDF, right? They gun down anyone that they see. They gun down anyone that they see, and they're willing to even kill their own people, right? Can you imagine a person with a white flag and you shoot that person down? You don't even do that to the enemy. Even if your enemy comes surrendering with a white flag, you don't shoot him. You don't kill him. This is not from the ethics of war, according to anyone. When someone surrenders, you accept that surrender, right? And these people, they were their own people. And the only reason why they were holding the sign of surrender was so that their own people would not get confused and think that they were combatants, right? We're civilians. That's what they wanted to signify, but they got shot and killed anyways. So this is the way of the IDF. This is the way of the IDF. This is the Hannibal Directive. And there are many more instances of it that took place in the aftermath of October 7th in Gaza, right? And many news organizations reported on it. Even Israeli news media reported on these incidents happening, right? So it's not only from the outside, like even internally, the Israeli media was reporting on these incidents taking place and the Hannibal Directive being implemented, even though officially it was shut down in 2016. According to the claims of the Israeli government. But in reality, it continued to be practiced during the war that started in 2023. So this gives you some more insight into the mentality of the Zionist regime, the Israeli government and the Israeli military, the IDF, that called themselves, they proclaim themselves to be the most moral army in the world. They call themselves the most moral army in the world. But the reality is that they are the opposite of what they claim. They are the most immoral, unethical, and evil army in the world. And I think that is something that the world has now seen. The eyes of the world have been opened to the reality of who the IDF are, who the Israeli military are. Right? They're the vilest and the most evil of people. And this is something that has now become apparent for the world to see. So inshallah we'll stop there for today bi'idhnillah, and inshallah next week we'll continue with more on the history of the Holy Land bi'idhnillah. Jazakumullahu khayra wa barakallahu feekum. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.